In May 2012, three descendants of Captain John Botham met at Nether House near Hathersedge in Derbyshire, home of Jerry and Sue Roost. Also present were David Reynolds and his wife Penny, and Jeff Rippingale, who has done much of the genealogical research. Captain John Botham was the great ×4 grandfather of Jerry and Jeff, and the great ×3 grandfather of David. The occasion was to mark the inauguration of a sword, a family heirloom believed to have belonged to Captain Botham at the Battle of Waterloo, and passed down to Jerry through 4 generations. Restored to its former glory, the sword is now mounted on the wall in Nether House, below a chart of the family tree.
Okay, here we are in Nether House. We're in the hall. This is not the oldest part of the house. The oldest part is just behind me, and that part of the house dates back to the mid-15th century. It's a Grade 2 listed building. It's been built in various different pieces over a period of about 200 years, and the history of the site is interesting. We've had a few bits of information from local historians, and it turns out that the whole Robin Hood legend, all of that, comes from the North Derbyshire, South Yorkshire area, not at all Nottingham, nowhere near Nottingham. But of course in those days this was all wooded and may well have been part of the area controlled by the Sheriff of Nottingham. But this is where the Robin Hood legend is based, and there are many places around here that have reference to that. Right in front of the house, directly to the east, over the fields, one walks for about a mile down to the River Derwent. And across the River Derwent, on stepping stones, which are very ancient, to Hathersage. Now it's known that there was a Little family, that's the surname Little, who lived in a cottage very near the parish church in Hathersage. They had a son, John Little, who was an unusually large man. This is historical fact. It is also thought that Little John returned to Hathersage after many years wandering around as an outlaw or whatever it was he did, and eventually died in Hathersage. But it is thought he died here in this place. It is known that John Little's grave is in the Hathersage parish church, and indeed you can see it today. It's between 2 yew trees, and is the site of John Little, or Little John's final resting place. So this house has some history associated with it, and we are just guardians for a relatively short period of time.
Up there.
There's one Alice there, there's another Alice as well.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So those are the 2 Alices. We think that the Alice that your father was talking about was this Alice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So she is the granddaughter of John Botham, and is likely to have a reasonable grip of the story, because she's probably had it first hand, and your father got it first hand from her. So that's quite
Except that he died before she was born. Oh, you don't know that, but...
What?
Well, we don't
No,
know.
we don't know when Alice died.
No. And we don't know when John Botham died, do we? This is sad.
Right.
Okay.
So let me propose a toast to our ancestor, Captain John Botham.
Captain John
Captain John Botham. Captain John Botham. Good for him.
Now the story goes that Captain John Botham fought at Waterloo, and at Waterloo he picked up a sword. We think it was his own. It may not have been his own. And the sword is here, complete with, and we'll have a look at it in a minute, bloodstains. But you can see that it's in very good condition. That's because it's been refurbished. But David, you remember the sword long before it was refurbished. What's your memory?
Yeah, from the 1960s. It used to lie on a table, and it was filthy. It was all amongst bowls of fruit and old books and my father's manuscripts, your grandfather. And I thought nothing of it at all. And he hardly ever talked about it. He might have just said, oh, it's some ancestor's sword. And he didn't really know where to put it, I don't think. He just left it there.
It was there.
He couldn't quite throw it away, but he it sat around, you know, and it was all rusty and boring thing. That's it. Really.
But he wrote about it in his autobiography.
Right. Yes, he did.
He wrote about it in Golden Days. And can you recall what he said?
He said pretty much that we have an ancestor who fought at Waterloo, and that the connection was between his grandfather's wife. His grandfather married a Miss Botham.
Right.
I think I've got that right.
Yeah.
And she was the granddaughter or great-granddaughter?
Granddaughter.
Granddaughter of this man who fought there.
Right.
That's pretty much what he said.
So how do we know that Captain John Botham was at Waterloo?
Okay. We've got the evidence that David's just described about the autobiography of his father, my grandfather, Clifton, who remembers the story from Alice Botham. The other pieces of information we've turned up are, first of all, that relate to the sword, and secondly, that relate to the First Regiment of the Lifeguards. It's a matter of historical record that in, I think it was around 1800, that A. John Botham was gazetted into the First Regiment of the Lifeguards as a cornet, which is the first commissioned level. Between there and Waterloo is 15 years, which is about right. It's sort of consistent with the amount of time it might take for a cornet to become a captain, but we're uncertain. As it relates to the sword, we know a lot about the sword. We know that the sword is a light cavalry sabre. We know that it's a 1796 pattern. We know it's made in its hundreds of thousands over a period of at least 50 years, from the back end of the 18th century right through beyond the Crimea. It was a formidable weapon, which the French on all occasions complained as being outside the reasonable use for war. They thought it was too vicious. Very successful weapon, and a cavalry weapon, but as I say, light cavalry. The First Regiment of the Lifeguards is actually a heavy cavalry regiment. So that doesn't quite gel, but officers in all the military areas did carry weapons for fighting that were not necessarily the same as the weapons they used for ceremonial purposes. So it's not at all unlikely that a captain, even in the heavy cavalry, might choose such a weapon.
Can I just stop you? What does gazetting mean? What do you mean by gazetting?
Well, I don't know whether it's still true today, but it used to be that in the armed services, when people had something to be announced about them, the officers only, whether they were becoming an officer, or they'd been promoted, or they won a medal, or they'd been killed, and all those things. This was all published, I think monthly, in a gazette.
I see.
And this was the means that the military had for communicating with the world about what was going on with all their officers. So
that's a definite record that A. John Botham entered the Lifeguards.
Entered the First Regiment of the Lifeguards, because there were two regiments. So absolute rock hard evidence.
Okay.
We're not absolutely sure it's our John Botham.
No, but
it is extremely likely to be when you look at the ages and the dates that we've got. Yeah.
Okay. I remember David telling me that when he saw the sword when he was young, it had blood on it. Was it still there? Did you have to get it cleaned up?
If you look, you can see the black spots of rust. Can you also see, you may have to get the right angle to the light, that it appears that there is a streak of black coming down there, and more clearly on this side is the blood. And if we can bring it up to the camera perhaps, I'm not sure how well we can do this. How's that?
Yeah.
So how old would that blood be? Like 200 years old?
And all French. And while we're close to the camera, also, you can, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but here is engraved the name of the sword maker, which is a German sword maker. And so it was made, we know, in Germany, imported into the UK, and issued to the cavalry here in the UK.
Yep. Goodness. It's lethal, isn't it?
It is.
Look at the point on that. Put it back. Very, very heavy.
And Jeff, you've got to have a go at this as well. You've got it. You've got
wow. It's heavy.
I'm not sure a girl's allowed to hold it.
Well, as an editor, you know, not with a sword, but with a pen. Wow.
With a ruthless streak. can't imagine killing someone with this.
Oh, I can.
No,
It's too heavy.
Wait, my arms aren't long enough.
Sue.
Well, I'm not sure about it. The idea that this is being used in anger in some way, I find a bit overwhelming, to be honest. The idea that you would start slashing at somebody below you with that, which is how they did it, wasn't it?
But
They
obviously
slashed.
cavalry, that's right.
It is incredibly heavy, isn't it? Amazing. So you must be really strong just to wield the thing. Yeah. There we go, Jeff.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. Gosh, it is heavy, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well, this film will have to be edited and cut, and I can think of no better weapon with which to cut it. Like that, so we'll chop that bit, we'll chop that bit, and we'll hopefully come up with a little memento that will be in the family maybe as long as the sword.
Oh,
For the
nice
next
to see.
200 years.
So a couple of things about this. First of all, it's a cavalry sabre, and therefore its use was not for sword fighting. It was never used, or only if really necessary, to sword fight with. It was used entirely as a killing machine for infantry. Very rarely did cavalry fight cavalry. Usually the cavalry would pursue the infantry of a broken line in the enemy's ranks. And there are two principal cavalry cuts. That's one, and that's the other. And those cuts are to take the enemy from behind, usually, down there or down there, missing the horse's head. Sometimes they would be in a fight and there'd be a danger that the sword may get knocked out of their hands. And that's what a sword knot is for. This is a ceremonial sword knot, the one that and it's the cavalry ceremonial sword knot. But originally it would have been just a plain black leather band, and it goes around the wrist. So that if the sword gets dropped or knocked, if you're on horseback you can't pick it up. So hence the sword knot. The blood on the blade, we have to believe is French. We have to believe it's 200 years old. And it is, as far as I know, the oldest piece of family memorabilia we have.
The following day, everyone went for a vigorous climb up Standage Edge to admire the glorious scenery of the Derbyshire Peak District.